Dead America. The Seattle Incursion Part 2 by Derek Slayton. Chapter 1. Church and Garrett stood on the back stoop of the last car on the train, the cool air smacking them in the face as they rolled down the tracks. Both men stared out into the suburbs of Seattle, watching as hordes of zombies rampaged through the streets. One by one, the creatures fell from the cattle cars on the train, most of whom quickly scrambled to their feet and raced off in search of fresh prey. Much to the two militiamen's surprise, there wasn't much in the way of gunfire coming from the town. "You know, Church," Garrett said, "I'm starting to think we may have really put them in a pinch with their ammunition. I haven't heard any shots in the last mile or so." "Maybe they're just saving them up for you," Church replied. Garrett cracked a smile as he pulled out a walkie-talkie, clicked it on, and spoke forcefully. "First strike team, move now." Within seconds of the order being given, 10 heavily armed militiamen leapt from the train, hitting the ground and rolling to minimize the impact. Church and Garrett watched as the men got up and immediately formed a defensive perimeter to protect against a couple of straggler zombies rushing toward them. Rather than fire, the militiamen waited until the ghouls were within range, working as a unit to slow their momentum and deliver knife strikes to their heads. Seconds later, they broke up into smaller teams and moved toward the interior of the suburb, vanishing behind buildings. "I presume that they're more than capable of getting the job done?" Church asked. "They're some of my most experienced men," Garrett replied. "They'll not only keep the military busy, but they'll clear a path for the rest of us to get through once we get you to where you need to go." The duo looked back as their attention was drawn by multiple shots popping off. As quickly as the gunfire began, it ended. "Sounds like they're off to a good start at least," Church said. "I've known those boys a lot of years," Garrett said, "and seen them do some crazy stuff over the last couple of months. They're not going to disappoint you, Church." "And what about you, Garrett?" Church asked. "Are you going to disappoint me?" Garrett let out a smirk, shaking his head no as he clicked on the radio again. "Second strike team, go." Garrett left the question unanswered as he and Church turned to watch a dozen men jump off the train, landing in the same manner as the first team. Within moments, they too had vanished into the Seattle suburbs, unleashing chaos as they went. Before either of them could speak, the radio crackled to life. "Garrett, do you copy?" Ryan's voice came through. "I'm here, Ryan. What do you have for me?" Garrett responded. "We have the bridge in sight, so the train yard is half a mile away," Ryan said. "Good. I want you and Cam ready to move as soon as we cross it," Garrett instructed. "And the rest of the men?" Ryan asked. "They're going to stay on board and secure the train yard for Church," Garrett replied. "Copy that." "We'll be ready to move," Ryan confirmed. "Well, Church," Garrett said, "it looks like that's my cue." "Make sure they know we were here," Church told him. "Trust me," Garrett said. "They're never going to forget I was here." "Good man," Church said. "And remember, you're only going to have the radio for another 5 minutes, give or take. As soon as we roll into the yard, we're flooding the airwaves." "I appreciate the heads up," Garrett said. Garrett looked over to the side, watching as a large bridge rolled by. It stretched over a large highway cutting through the center of town, but had little in the way of activity, a far cry from its pre-apocalypse existence. Garrett clicked on the radio while securing his backpack and assault rifle. "Ryan, Cam, let's move." He secured the radio on his belt before stepping off the back of the train. As he hit the ground, he rolled forward to disperse the impact. A moment later, he was on his feet, rifle in hand, scanning the area. Garrett turned around, spotting his top 2 men, Ryan and Cam, walking toward him. Both of them were tall, muscular, and looked like they had been in more than their fair share of combat situations over the years. "So you want to run with just a 3-man team, Garrett?" Cam asked. "Shit, Cam," Ryan said. "The 3 of us with our loadout, we're as good as 10 men, easy." "Did you boys get what we need?" Garrett asked. "Yep," Cam replied. "I'm running full auto and have enough full mags to cut down half the city if need be." "While I'm not as reckless as my counterpart here," Ryan added, "I have enough explosives to level a city block, and then some. "That's what I like to hear," Garrett said. Garrett looked down at his watch, clicking on a timer that began counting down from 60 minutes. "All right, boys, 1 hour of fun, and we're headed south. Are you ready to get going?" Ryan and Cam gave their leader a firm nod, which put a smile on Garrett's face. All three of them readied their rifles before heading off toward a nearby neighborhood. The three of them moved casually, as if they didn't have a care in the world. Despite the laid-back approach, they kept their heads on a swivel, scanning for threats. Before they could get halfway to the closest house, a zombified soldier locked onto them and began rushing toward them. "Come on now," Cam grumbled. "These things are supposed to be working for us, not against us." "They're not dogs, Cam," Ryan shot back. "They're almost as dumb as you are." Cam smirked as he raised his rifle, squeezed the trigger, and held it down for a full second. Half a dozen rounds spat out from the barrel, ripping through the upper torso and head of the ghoul, sending it to the ground. "Jesus, Cam," Ryan said. "Was that really necessary?" "Nope," Cam replied, "but it was fun." "You'll have your chance for fun," Garrett said. "But for the time being, how about you leave the stragglers to one of us?" "Yeah, okay, Garrett," Cam conceded. "Come on," Garrett ordered. "Let's get into the neighborhood and start kicking up some trouble." The three men walked down the middle of the street, their casual attitude gone, replaced with a serious combat stance. They could hear movement and screams coming from the south, prompting them to head in that direction. The trio cut through the yard between two houses, spotting a handful of civilians struggling to fight against three ghouls. The survivors were stuck on top of a car, with the creatures grasping at their feet. One of the men on the rooftop kicked at the ghouls, trying to get them away, but only succeeded in getting his ankle grabbed. He let out a terrified scream as he fell onto his back, allowing the zombie to pull his leg far enough off the car to sink its teeth into it. The other two civilians on the roof tried to pull the man back to his feet, but it was to no avail. The rest of the zombies converged on the man, joining in on the leg buffet. Within seconds, the creatures managed to pull the man off the car, feasting on his still flailing body as he hit the pavement. "What do you think?" Ryan asked. "Should we help?" "I think we should help motivate them," Cam replied. Ryan cracked a smile, raising his rifle toward the mob, only to adjust his aim toward the windows of the car. He squeezed off a couple of shots, shattering the glass and terrifying the survivors. The two civilians looked over to the militiamen, watching them playfully wave before raising their weapons in their direction. With no other choice, the two people leapt off the car in the opposite direction, running toward the backyard of a house as a couple of creatures pursued them. "So where do we want to set up shop?" Cam asked. "Let's push east a couple of blocks and find us something big to blow up," Garrett said. "We need the military to think that this is a full-scale attack." The two other militiamen nodded as they followed Garrett through the yards. They moved swiftly as the screams from terrified people continued to reverberate against the brick houses. After a block, the trio found themselves at the edge of a small business district. Across from them stood a gas station, with a fast food restaurant on the opposite corner. Cam's eyes grew wide when he saw the giant tank on the gas station lot. "What are the odds that it's still full?" Cam asked. "About the same odds of you solving string theory," Ryan replied. Cam looked at Ryan with contempt for a moment before his expression changed to confusion as his brain struggled to understand the insult. After a few moments of this, Ryan started laughing at his friend. Before Cam could respond, Garrett yelled out in a near panic, "Contact right, contact right." Garrett raised his rifle and squeezed off 3 shots in rapid succession. The other two militiamen snapped into the moment, aiming their weapons in the same direction, spotting half a dozen soldiers down the block. 4 of the soldiers were engaged in a struggle with zombies, trying to fight them off hand to hand. The other 2 soldiers had rifles in their hands, aiming them toward the militiamen. Garrett's first volley missed the target, hitting the wall of the store behind the soldiers. The impact sent debris flying through the air, which was enough to cause the soldiers to flinch as they squeezed the trigger. The bullets from their rifles flew harmlessly over the heads of the militiamen, giving Ryan time to dial in his shot. With a single squeeze of the trigger, he sent a round downrange, striking one of the gunmen's center mass and dropping him to the ground. Rather than return fire, His partner dropped to the ground to check on him, giving Garrett a chance to steady himself. He sent 3 rounds toward the soldiers in rapid succession. The first 2 slammed into the back of a zombie, ripping through it and hitting the soldier it was struggling with. The soldier fell to the ground, pulling the zombie along with him. Despite the distance, the militiaman could hear the screaming coming from the man as the ghoul ripped into his throat. The panic amongst the soldiers began to set in as their comrades screamed for help. Cam took advantage, pulling the trigger down and sending half a magazine's worth of ammunition in their direction. The automatic stream of bullets tore through zombie and soldier alike, cutting through their torsos with ease. While the soldiers were on the ground in pain, the zombies were unaffected, giving them free rein to enjoy their meal. "Looks like the military is really dropping their standards," Ryan said. "A couple of those things and a handful of rifle rounds flying in their direction, and they fell apart. I've heard through the grapevine that when the shit hit the fan, they pulled everybody out of basic and sent them off to the front lines," Garrett said. "Jesus," Ryan muttered. "That was probably the first time they've ever had a gun fired in their direction." "Yeah, well, whatever," Cam said. "It's what they signed up for." "Hate to say it, but Cam here's right," Garrett added. "If they're in that uniform, they're not on our side. And if Church pulls off what he's trying to do, their deaths just might mean something." "We can only hope," Ryan said. "So, are we going to see if there's anything in those tanks or not?" Cam asked. Ryan let out a sigh, shaking his head. "You're lucky you're good at killing people, because anybody with half a brain knows they've emptied out every tank from here to Portland. You don't cover this much ground on foot, especially without ammo." "Don't worry, big fella," Garrett said. "We're going to find something to blow up real soon. Now come on, let's get moving." Chapter 2. Garrett, Ryan, and Cam continued moving to the east as the sounds of chaos filled the streets. Screaming could be heard in multiple directions, joining the moaning and rapid footsteps of the undead chasing after the helpless civilians. A handful of gunshots popped off to the south, however. They were still several blocks away. The trio of militiamen ran by the last storefront on the street, entering into another neighborhood. As their feet hit the grass, a trio of zombified soldiers emerged from the next block. One of the ghouls spotted the trio, letting out a horrific moan before rushing towards them, the creature's friends following close behind. Cam raised his rifle to cut them down, however. Garrett put his hand on the barrel to prevent him from firing. "What the hell, Garrett?" Cam hissed. "Those gunshots to the south are getting closer. We're not ready to give up our position just yet. We need to get those charges set," Garrett replied. Cam let out a dejected sigh before reluctantly nodding his head. He slung his rifle over his shoulder, reaching to the bottom portion of his leg and grabbing a large machete out of a sheath strapped to it. "Well, come on then. I'm not doing this by myself," Cam said. Garrett and Ryan chuckled as both of them pulled out knives of their own. The 3 men spread out a few yards from each other, hoping to draw the attention of one of the running creatures. Much to their surprise, the ghouls did just as they had hoped. Cam stepped up to his target, swinging the machete across his body and catching the zombie right on the side of the neck. The force of the blow sliced through the ghoul's spine, completely severing the head in a single go. Ryan and Garrett took a less risky approach, reaching out their arms and planting them firmly into the zombies' chests to slow them down. While the creatures thrashed about, their heads remained more or less in the same position, allowing them to deliver an easy kill shot with their blades. With the immediate threats dealt with, the trio of militiamen scanned the neighborhood for more zombies, finding the streets surprisingly empty. "With as many of those things as we set loose, I'm kind of surprised we're not seeing any of them," Ryan said. Before anybody could respond, a torrent of gunfire went off from the south. Dozens of shots in a matter of seconds, as if several soldiers were in a panic. "Those things love noise, and they keep giving them more," Garrett said. All 3 men flinched as a woman yelled unexpectedly from the house beside them. The militiamen turned quickly, raising their rifles, prompting the woman to fall to her knees and throw her hands up in the air. "Please don't shoot. I'm alive. I'm alive," she cried. Ryan and Cam glanced over to Garrett, wondering what they should do. Rather than put her down, Garrett lowered his weapon and walked toward the young woman. He smiled softly, gently motioning for her to get back to her feet. "It's okay. We're not going to hurt you," Garrett assured her. "Oh, thank God you're here. Those things are just running everywhere." "I don't know what to do," the woman said. Rather than address her directly, Garrett talked past her, focusing intently on the house behind her. "Is this your house by chance?" he asked. Confusion overtook the woman's face as she responded. "Yes, it is." "And what kind of heat do you have in there?" Garrett asked. The woman's mind froze up, as if it couldn't comprehend why he was asking what he was asking. Her mouth opened to respond, but all that came out was incomprehensible gibberish. "It's not a difficult question. What kind of heat do you have in there?" Garrett pressed. "I have no idea. But there's a tank out back," she stammered. "Sounds like propane," Garrett remarked. "What does that matter? What are you going to do about those creatures running around?" the woman asked. "Well, my dear, once my friend Ryan here put some explosives on that tank of yours, I'm pretty sure we're going to be attracting a lot of them in this direction," Garrett said. The woman's eyes went wide with fear as the realization that the militiamen weren't there to help set in. Her body quivered for a moment, as if her mind was telling her to run, but her legs weren't cooperating. Cam chuckled a bit as he leaned in and whispered, "Boo." His voice caused her to jump back, nearly falling over in the process. Garrett reached out and grabbed her arm, steadying her. "I think what my friend here is trying to say is, you might want to run." "I'd suggest heading east and finding a quiet place to hide," Ryan added. The woman began taking a few steps to the west, her eyes firmly locked onto the militia. Before she could get too far, Ryan let out a slight whistle to regain her attention, playfully pointing in the other direction. "East is this way. There should be fewer of those things," Ryan said. The woman continued staring at Ryan, giving him a half-hearted nod before sprinting in that direction. The militiamen watched, amused at the scene unfolding before them. "That's a damn shame. She was kind of cute," Cam remarked. "As if she'd be interested in a behemoth like you," Garrett said. "Especially after we blow her house to shit," Ryan added. Ryan reached into his bag, pulling out an explosive device. He flipped a switch, powering up the detonator before tossing it in the air playfully. "Let me set this on the tank, and we'll be on our way," Ryan said. The gunfire to the south continued to escalate, with dozens more shots going off in rapid succession. "Sounds like that's getting closer," Cam noted. "Ryan, get that device into place. I think we're going to have to find a defensive position before too long," Garrett instructed. "I'm on it, Garrett," Ryan replied. Ryan picked up the pace, running around to the back of the house to plant the explosive device. Meanwhile, the other two militiamen stood at the ready, checking their rifles to make sure they were topped off with ammunition as the gunfire continued to get closer. "So how are we playing this, Garrett? Stand-up fight? Hit and run? Because if they're anything like the young pups we encountered earlier, we should be able to have some fun with it," Cam said. "And what if they're not young pups, Cam? How do you see that going?" Garrett asked. Cam thought about it for a moment before letting out a chuckle and shrugging his shoulders. "I'm going to cut them down just the same. I just might have to try a little harder." The two of them continued listening to the gunfire going off to the south as it intensified, growing ever closer. "Can't be more than a block or two away," Garrett muttered. Garrett looked around, spotting a two-story house on the corner. He motioned towards it as Ryan rejoined them. "The charge is set. Just give me the signal, and it'll go up," Ryan reported. "Keep it in your back pocket. We're taking up an ambush position in the corner house. When they get close, we'll set it off and cut them down while they're distracted and disoriented," Garrett said. "You got it, Garrett," Ryan replied. "Come on, let's move," Garrett ordered. The three militiamen rushed towards the house on the next corner, no more than 50 yards away from their current position. They hesitated before crossing the side street, but moved swiftly when they saw movement 2 blocks down. "Weapons down. Weapons down," Garrett barked. The three men darted across the intersection, keeping their weapons as concealed by their sides as they could. Despite the distance, they could see a squad of at least a dozen men moving up the street and firing in all directions. Garrett stopped by a tree in the front yard as Ryan and Cam moved towards the front door. He looked down the street towards the soldiers slowly making their way towards them. Much to his relief, they continued moving just like they were before, not taking a defensive position. Garrett cracked a smile before running over to meet his men in front of the house. "How are we looking?" Ryan asked. "Well, if they did see us, they probably think we're those things and not militia." "They didn't change their movements at all," Garrett said. Ryan brandished the detonator, letting out a sly smile as he spoke. "Well, they're definitely going to be changing their movements here before too long." Garrett nodded as Cam stepped up to the door, delivering a forceful kick to the front of it. The door barely budged, frustrating the big militiaman. Before he could deliver another kick, Ryan put his hand on his shoulder. "Come on, man, work smarter, not harder," Ryan said. Cam looked confused as Ryan took point. He spun his rifle around, using the butt of the gun to smash out the bottom window pane on the door. He smirked as he reached inside, undoing the deadbolt and opening the door. With a flourish of his hands, he motioned for his counterpart to go first. "Yeah, you can wipe that smirk off your face, smart boy." "Unless you want me to do it for you," Cam grumbled. Despite his best effort, Ryan couldn't contain his smile, allowing it to grow even more. Cam continued staring him down as he stepped through the door, where he was caught off guard by the homeowner. A pudgy, middle-aged man swung a wooden baseball bat as hard as he could toward the giant militiaman. The makeshift weapon slammed into Cam's upper arm with enough force to make him wince in pain, but little else. The militiaman turned in anger toward the considerably smaller civilian, letting out a grunt as he stepped towards him. The middle-aged man swung the bat again, only to have Cam catch it in his hand and yank it away. "I'm going to make you pay for that, little man," Cam growled. Garrett watched as Cam raised his assault rifle, letting out a yell as the trigger was pulled. Half a dozen bullets poured out of the barrel, cutting the civilian's torso to shreds. Garrett grabbed onto Cam's arm, yanking him back and getting him to stop firing. "What in the hell is wrong with you?" Garrett snapped. "What? He attacked me, so I attacked back," Cam replied. "You're twice his size. Smack his ass around instead of shooting him," Garrett shouted. "I wanted to make an example out of him," Cam said smugly. "Well, you certainly did that. You also let those soldiers down the street know where we are," Garrett said. Cam's smug attitude quickly dropped as he realized what he had done. Rather than dwell on it, he casually swapped out his magazine for a fresh one, slapping it in and chambering the first round. "It doesn't matter. They can't stop what's coming," Cam said. Garrett wanted to lay into his comrade but opted to take a deep breath to steady himself instead. A moment later, he began barking out orders to his men. "Ryan, get upstairs and clear the floor. Then find a firing position that gives you the best vantage point over the road," Garrett commanded. "What about the explosives?" Ryan asked. "Don't trigger it until I give the signal. We were going to use it as a diversion, but now we're going to have to try and use it to put some of those soldiers down," Garrett said. "And how do we do that if they're coming up from the south?" Cam asked. "Well, Cam, since you seem so eager to use that machine gun of yours, you're going to put the fear of God into them and get them running for cover. I want you out back, so when they move up to the house, you open fire and push them up the street," Garrett said. Cam took a few steps to the back of the house as Garrett followed. They both looked outside, seeing a giant backyard that ran up against another house. "How do you feel about me getting in there?" Cam asked. "Do it, but wait on my signal to open up on them. When they get into view, I'm going to hit them a couple of times and see if I can't draw them in this direction. Once you're behind their lines, hit them hard," Garrett instructed. Cam nodded to his superior before darting out the back door of the house. Garrett stood and watched with his rifle in hand, providing cover for his partner. Once the big man was safely inside, the militia leader looked at his watch, nodding his head in approval. 38 more minutes. And we are making a run for the south. We got this. Chapter 3. Cam shoved the back door of the neighboring house open, flicking it shut with his heel while raising his fully automatic rifle to the ready. He swept through the bottom floor with haste, relieved to see that nobody was home. The militiaman made his way back to the rear of the house, pulling back the curtain and giving Garrett a thumbs up to let him know he was in position. Despite the distance, he could see his team leader motioning towards the road. "Looks like it's time to lay the smackdown on these assholes," Cam muttered. Cam stayed low as he moved towards the side of the house, taking a knee beside the window, looking through the slight opening at the side. Even though he didn't have a full view of the street, he could easily see half a dozen soldiers moving up slowly. "Come on now, where's the rest of you at?" "I'm ready to have some fun," he murmured. Cam's attention was drawn to the front of the house as the knob on the front door turned. The squeaking from the hinges filled the house, 2 sets of footsteps following close behind. The militiaman's face contorted in frustration at the sound, his mind running through several scenarios as the door gently clicked shut. A string of curses danced in his head as he gently leaned his rifle against the windowsill. Cam rose to his feet, pulling out a knife as he moved carefully across the room to the closed door just to the side of him. He listened intently as the footsteps split up, as if the soldiers were clearing the house. The militiaman gripped his blade tightly, staring down at the doorknob mere inches from his hand. His excitement grew as it began to turn, pouncing on the unsuspecting soldier as soon as the door opened. Cam thrust his hand up, grabbing the young man by the throat and driving him back into the other room. The soldier tried to scream, but between the pressure on his throat and the repeated stabs to his chest, the only sound that came out of his mouth was a slight gasp. Cam acted like a man possessed, stabbing the soldier half a dozen times in a matter of seconds. As the man's life drained from his body, the militiaman grabbed onto the top of his fatigues, gently laying him down to the floor rather than letting him drop. Despite his best efforts, an awkward clatter reverberated through the house. "Are you all right in there?" the second soldier called out. Cam's head spun around at the sound of the man's partner calling out. The militiaman froze in place, trying to get a read on his movements. "Answer me, damn it. Are you all right in there?" the soldier repeated. Cam continued his silence, waiting on the soldier to make the first move. After no response came, the other man rushed towards the doorway near the front part of the house. The militiaman wasted no time in moving towards the noise, getting to the doorway just as the soldier emerged from the hallway. The man's eyes grew wide as Cam's blade pierced his throat. He attempted to raise his weapon to fire, but the militiaman kept a firm grip on it, making sure it never became a threat. With a forceful yank, Cam freed his knife, sending a spurt of blood onto the white walls of the house. The soldier collapsed to the ground, gripping his throat in a futile attempt to prevent himself from bleeding out. "Maybe next time knock before coming into a man's house," Cam said. The fear in the soldier's eyes brought a smile to Cam's face. However, the militiaman's glee was interrupted by gunfire erupting outside. "Well, I'd love to continue mocking you, but duty calls," he said, turning away from the dying man. Cam raced back to his rifle as the gunfire outside intensified. He dropped to one knee and gently pulled back the curtain to get a view of the battle raging outside. 2 soldiers were lying face down in the street, one of whom was writhing around in pain, while the other remained motionless. The rest of the soldiers had scattered, taking up defensive positions behind the trees and cars in the 2 yards across the street. The soldiers exchanged gunfire with the 2 militiamen in the corner house, with neither side seeming able to gain the upper hand. Despite the stalemate, Cam could see 3 of the soldiers grouping together, preparing to make a move. "Now we're talking. Come on boys, man up so I can put you in your place," Cam said, his finger dancing over the trigger in anticipation. He didn't have to wait long as the trio of soldiers made their move, breaking from cover and rushing towards the house as their comrades laid down covering fire. Cam didn't pounce at once, wanting to make sure they were far enough away from cover that they had no chance of escaping his ambush. When the trio stepped off the asphalt, the militiaman sprung his trap. Bullets shattered the glass and flew towards the unsuspecting soldiers. Cam's aim was on target, cutting through all 3 men in a fraction of a second. Rather than be satisfied with knocking them out of the battle, however, the militiaman emptied the rest of his magazine into their bodies, putting them down for good. Cam quickly popped out the empty mag, grabbing another one to slap into his weapon. Before he could reload, however, bullets flew in his direction, sending shards of glass raining down onto him. The militiaman laughed as he dove back onto the ground, amused by their attempt to take him out. "Is that all you boys got?" he taunted. Cam leapt back into firing position, shoving his rifle through the broken window and holding down the trigger. He didn't bother to aim at a specific target, just in their general direction. The militiaman knew his goal wasn't to take them out, rather, it was to push them towards the rigged house. His tactics worked as intended, causing panic amongst the soldiers' ranks. A couple of them tried to hold their ground, firing back towards the militiaman as he continued to unload on them. Most of the soldiers, however, retreated across the street towards the trap house. "Yeah, that's right. Go right where we want you," Cam muttered. Cam ducked back behind cover as he slapped in a fresh magazine. As he returned to the window, he changed his firing tactics, honing in on a single target before squeezing the trigger. Half a dozen bullets peppered the tree that a soldier was hiding behind. One of the projectiles went straight through the wood, hitting the man in the side and sending him careening to the ground, making him easy prey for the militiamen to pick off. Cam adjusted his aim towards the other soldier that stood his ground. However, before he could fire, a couple of zombies emerged from the neighboring yard. The militiaman laughed to himself, watching the creatures rush his foe. The soldier managed to pop off a couple of panic rounds towards the ghouls, hitting them in their torsos but doing nothing to slow them down. Another shot fired off as they tackled him, ripping into his flesh. Cam popped out his half-empty magazine, slamming in a fresh one as he continued to scan the battlefield. The remaining 5 soldiers were across the street, taking up defensive positions in and around the rigged house. "Come on, Ryan, hit the button already," Cam shouted. A moment later, Garrett emerged from the back door of the corner house, moving up to the side of the structure and glancing towards the soldiers. He let out a loud whistle, getting Cam's attention. Through hand signals, Garrett let Cam know that the house was going up in 5 seconds and to lay down covering fire to keep them pinned down. The militiaman immediately complied, holding the trigger down and sending a torrent of bullets towards the defending soldiers. Cam's weapon clicked empty just as Ryan hit the detonator. Despite the distance, Cam could feel the heat coming off of the explosion, which rattled what was left of the windows. His smile grew from ear to ear as he watched the fireball and smoke plume rise into the air. "Hell yeah," he shouted. Cam glanced over to Garrett, who was frantically waving for him to get outside. The militiaman was confused for a moment before he saw his leader firing off a couple of shots across the street. It didn't take long for Cam to see that a pack of zombified soldiers were rushing his position. "Damn it," Cam cursed. Cam raced towards the back door of the house, throwing open the door and immediately opening fire on the encroaching zombies. Half a magazine's worth of ammunition tore through the pack of ghouls, dropping several of them with headshots. His marksmanship cleared enough of the threat to allow Garrett to put down the last couple that were gaining ground on him. A moment later, Ryan emerged from the house, moving towards the others in the middle of the yard. Before he reached them, however, he raised his rifle and fired in the opposite direction of the road. Cam and Garrett spun around, seeing a dozen zombies racing towards them. "Move, move," Garrett shouted. The 3 militiamen took off running, with Garrett and Ryan reaching the road a few steps ahead of Cam. The large militiaman lagged behind, squeezing off the remainder of his rounds toward the mob that was getting closer by the second. Garrett and Ryan got 20 yards down the street before they realized their comrade wasn't with them. "Cam, get your ass over here," Garrett yelled. The duo watched helplessly as Cam began running towards them, only to catch a bullet in his thigh. The big man tumbled to the ground, yelling out in pain from the injury. His screams turned to terror as he rolled over in time to see the swarm of ghouls converging on him. "Cam," Ryan shouted. Ryan instinctively tried to race to his friend, however, Garrett grabbed him by the shirt and yanked him in the opposite direction. "He's gone. We have to move," Garrett barked. "Where the hell did that shot come from?" Ryan demanded. "It doesn't matter. We have to move," Garrett replied. Ryan let out some curses under his breath as the 2 militiamen ran down the road as fast as they could. At the next intersection, Garrett grabbed Ryan by the shirt and yanked him to the side, guiding him towards a fenced-in backyard. The 2 militiamen hopped the wooden fence, taking a knee to catch their breath. "We have to go take those assholes down. They killed Cam," Ryan spat. "Those things will take care of that for us," Garrett said. "I want blood," Ryan growled. Garrett grabbed Ryan by the shirt, pulling him nose to nose and speaking in a menacing tone. "Then, go get it. Just don't expect your ride back to civilization to be waiting for you. Now we have a job to do, but if you want to run off, I won't stop you." Ryan thought about it for a moment before letting out a deep sigh, knowing that Garrett was right. With frustration firm in his voice, he spoke. "So what's the plan?" Garrett looked at his watch, giving a shrug once he saw how much time was left on the timer. "Screw the clock. We're heading south and getting out of Dodge." "All right, I'm with you, Garrett. Lead the way." Chapter 4. Private Walsh reached his hands up to the side of his head, pressing against his ears in a desperate attempt to stop them from ringing. The high-pitched whine was so intense that it prevented him from being able to sit up, let alone get to his feet. As he struggled to regain his composure, he looked across the yard towards the street. Flaming rubble stretched across the lawn, along with at least one charred body. It took a moment for the horrific sight to register with the injured private, but finally it clicked. "Jesus Christ, what the hell happened?" Walsh exclaimed. He managed to pull himself up just enough to turn around, his eyes going wide when he spotted what was left of the house. The entire center of the structure had been vaporized, replaced with rubble and flames. Just in front lay the bodies of 2 soldiers, neither man moving. Walsh continued rubbing at his head, trying to silence the noise. While that proved impossible, the ringing was overpowered by the sound of gunshots going off just to his left. The private's head snapped around, spotting another one of his squad mates kneeling beside a parked car, firing his rifle down the street. Private Byrd appeared injured, blood running down the side of his head, his fatigues in tatters. However, that didn't prevent him from continuing to fight. Walsh staggered to his feet, scouring the ground for his rifle, which lay a few yards to his left. He picked it up, stumbling a bit before gathering himself and getting into a firing position. By the time he locked in, he saw that Byrd had done all the damage they needed to do. A small horde of zombies swarmed over one of the militiamen, feasting on him in the middle of the street. Walsh stared at the scene for a moment, trying to scan the area for more threats, but collapsed down to one knee before he could spot anything. Walsh let out a pained grunt as he dropped, which drew the attention of Private Byrd. The gunman continued aiming downrange for several moments before feeling confident enough to break from cover, rushing to his friend's aid. "Walsh, are you okay?" Byrd asked. "I feel like I got hit by a bus," Walsh replied. "I'm pretty sure we did," Byrd said. He motioned back towards what was left of the house, prompting both of them to shake their heads. The carnage left in the wake of the explosion made them both realize just how lucky they were to still be standing. "Is anybody else still?" Walsh began, trailing off. He didn't want to finish his thought because he was scared he already knew the answer. With a subtle shake of the head, Byrd confirmed the worst. "Well, at least it looks like you got the bastards who did this," Walsh said. "I got one of them. And from the looks of it, he didn't go peacefully," Byrd replied. "How many others are there?" Walsh asked. "I had eyes on 2 more, but God only knows how many are running around in town. I've heard gunshots popping off all over the place, and I know they're not all ours," Byrd said. "So what do we do?" Walsh asked. "I don't know about you, but I'm going to go after those bastards," Byrd said. Walsh reached his hand up, getting Byrd to help him fully to his feet. He stood there for a moment, wobbly, but finally regained his footing. With a nod, he raised his weapon and spoke confidently. "Okay, let's go get these assholes," Walsh said. Byrd gently smacked his partner on the back before taking a step towards the road, only to freeze in place when he noticed that several of the zombies that had been feasting on Cam had lost interest. Both soldiers remained motionless, hoping that the ghouls didn't notice them. The ploy worked for a few seconds before one of the creatures noticed. It let out a guttural moan, alerting the other nearby zombies before a pack of them sprinted towards the soldiers. "Run," Byrd shouted. Byrd darted towards the street with Walsh following close behind. The 2 men pumped their legs hard, angling themselves away from the creatures bearing down on them. The duo reached the yard across the street, Private Byrd popping off a couple of shots from his rifle as he ran. The two men raced towards a chain-link fence, just to the right of the next house, picking up as much speed as they could before reaching it. With a leap, the two men crashed into the top of it, their legs still not back to full strength after the explosion. The spikes at the top dug into their flesh as they flipped over, sending spurts of blood flying back towards the creatures. Both men landed hard on the other side of the fence, relieved that the fence held the zombies at bay. "Are you good, Walsh?" Bird asked. "What's another few cuts at this point?" Walsh replied. "That's the spirit. Come on," Bird said. Both soldiers dragged themselves to their feet, moving swiftly across the yard and jumping the fence on the other side. They both kept their weapons aimed towards the street, spotting a couple of the zombies who were still hovering around the fallen militiamen. The duo stopped at the edge of the next house, staring down their enemy as he reanimated. Bird kept his rifle at the ready just in case the zombified Cam locked onto them. However, he lowered it when he saw just how much flesh was missing from his legs. Cam pulled himself to his feet, only to crash back down to the ground as the lower portion of his right leg snapped under his weight. Most of the muscle was gone below the knee, rendering the leg useless. Private Bird smacked his partner on the shoulder to get his attention. "Come on, let's get moving. There's a rally house a couple blocks down. Should be a radio in there so we can call this in," Bird said. "You don't have a radio on you?" "Didn't half of our squad have radios?" Walsh asked. "Yeah, they did. And they were either in the house when it went up, or they were way too close to those things. Now come on, we don't have a lot of time," Bird replied. Walsh nodded and followed Private Bird through the yards of several houses on the block. While the duo moved fast, they were attentive to their surroundings, checking every gap between houses for danger. They never saw movement, however, multiple bodies lined the road. "Did we do all that?" Walsh asked. "No, we didn't. I think we're on their trail," Bird said. The two soldiers continued moving through the neighborhood, getting a couple blocks up before hearing screaming coming from up ahead. Bird stopped their progress, listening carefully to figure out exactly where it was coming from. "Damn it. It sounds like it's coming from near the rally house," Bird said. Bird and Walsh picked up the pace, getting up to the next street and taking cover beside a large tree. Just across from them, they spotted two civilians up a tree, one of them sitting on a large branch doing their best to pull up their friend. On the ground below them were half a dozen zombified soldiers grasping at the poor man's feet. "We have to help them," Walsh said. "Okay, the rally house is 2 doors down from them. As soon as we open fire, you get to the house and open it up. I'll cover them," Bird instructed. "Let's do it," Walsh said. The two soldiers exchanged a fist bump before breaking from cover, running towards the chaotic scene with their rifles at the ready. The moment their boots hit the street, they squeezed the trigger, sending bullets into the heads of a couple of ghouls. The noise quickly drew the attention of the other 4 creatures, who broke away from the human pinata and sprinted towards the soldiers. The 2 men didn't panic, standing their ground and methodically putting them down. As the last shot blew out the back of the creature's head, Walsh turned and ran towards the house as Bird went to assist the survivors. "Come on, we have to move," Bird shouted. The hanging man let go of the branch, nearly falling on his ass but held up by the soldier. He quickly motioned to his friend, who jumped down. Once she was safely on the ground, Bird motioned for them to follow. The 3 of them raced towards the rally house a couple doors down, picking up the pace once they saw 3 ghouls at the top of the next block heading their way. We're good. Just keep running," Bird urged. The 3 of them darted across the yard towards the door that Walsh was holding open. One by one, they crossed the threshold into the safety of the house, slamming the door behind them just as the creatures reached it. Private Walsh kept his back placed firmly on the door for a moment as the zombies outside smacked against it, wanting to make sure it was secure before stepping away. Once he was confident they were safe, he joined the others in the living room. "We're locked up tight, so we're safe," Walsh said. Walsh stepped by the civilian couple, who were huddled together on the couch, clearly rattled by what they just experienced. On the table in the corner sat several boxes of ammunition and other supplies, free for the taking. "I'll check the ammo, see if you can track down a radio," Bird said. Walsh nodded and walked into the dining room, where more supplies were spread out on the table. He rummaged through a few boxes before finding a couple of radios. "We're in business," Walsh said. Walsh rushed back into the living room, handing over a radio to Bird, who clicked it onto the proper frequency and hit the button. "This is Private Bird in Sector C, and we have a situation on our hands over here and need immediate backup," Bird said. Walsh let go of the button, waiting for a response. However, he only received loud static in return. "That doesn't sound right," Walsh said. "Maybe it's my radio?" Bird replied. Walsh nodded and clicked on his radio. However, before he could speak, he received the same loud static. Undeterred, he flipped through all the different frequencies. His head dropped with each new channel, hearing the same droning static. "Either these radios are bad," Walsh began. "Or the militia is jamming our lines," Bird finished. "What the hell do we do?" Walsh asked. "We keep following the militia as far as we can and hope we run into another squad of our boys," Bird said. "And what about them?" Walsh asked, nodding to the living room where the frightened couple continued sitting in stunned silence. Bird nodded and walked over, taking a knee a few feet from them. "My friend and I have to leave, but this place is locked up tight, so none of those things can get in here. There should be some food and water in the kitchen, so help yourself. Just stay out of sight and as quiet as you can, and you'll be fine." "Can you do that for me?" Bird asked. Both of them gave a hesitant nod to the soldier, who patted the man on the knee as he rose to his feet. "Come on, Walsh, we have a hunt to get to." Chapter 5. The two privates stood by the back door of the rally house, scanning the backyard for threats. The noise they had made in saving the young couple had drawn a lot of attention to the front of the building, but for the moment, the zombie interest hadn't spread to the backyard. Private Bird said, "We break from here and head due south." Private Walsh asked, "What if they're doubling back to head north?" Private Bird replied, "Then we'll run into them. But I think they're making a run for our lines." "What makes you think that?" Walsh asked. "Because they were ahead of our lines when they ambushed us. They could have just set that house up to blow and taken us out when we approached, but they made a point to push through us," Bird explained. "That makes sense, I guess, but to what end?" Walsh questioned. Bird answered, "The hell if I know, Walsh. But if they have friends roaming around town, these assholes probably aren't the main threat." Walsh nodded. "If that's the case, then let's catch up to them and see what they can tell us." "I was just planning on shooting them, but I like that idea better," Bird said. Walsh chuckled as he gave his friend a pat on the back. With a subtle nod, Bird put his hand on the door and pushed it open, allowing the two of them to burst through into the backyard. The two men moved with purpose through the neighborhood, getting a couple of blocks to the south before hearing gunshots going off in the distance. Unlike the others they'd heard recently, this did not appear to be a one-sided affair. Private Walsh fell into line behind Bird, following him to the east towards an alley between two buildings before continuing to the south. The neighborhood had ended, and the duo found themselves in a small business district, which was the scene of a violent gun battle. The two soldiers inched up through the alley towards the main street, Bird keeping his rifle trained on the road ahead and Walsh covering their rear. Private Bird flinched, nearly firing as he saw 3 zombies race by the alley opening, but stopped himself from doing so. A split second later, he watched as the ghouls were ripped to shreds by a torrent of bullets that were fired erratically in their direction. Blood splurted out from their torsos, necks, and finally their heads as it appeared multiple gunmen unloaded on the creatures. Private Bird tapped his partner on the arm to get his attention, letting him know that he was moving up to the edge. He moved slowly as he approached, looking out to his left in the direction the zombies had emerged from, relieved to see no others following in their footsteps. The private was hesitant to poke his head out from cover as the gun battle intensified to his right. After a couple of deep breaths and some internal motivational yelling, he leaned out ever so slightly. 10 yards away from their position, 2 militiamen took up a defensive position in the entryway of a store, while a third remained behind the cover of a large metal mailbox. Down the street, no more than 30 yards away, half a dozen soldiers were in a similar position. Most of the men took cover in the entryways of stores, while others found protection behind metal trash bins. Despite the constant stream of bullets coming from both sides, neither seemed to be hitting their mark all that well. Upon seeing this, Private Byrd leaned back to Walsh to relay the plan. "There's 3 of them out there, and I don't have an angle on 2 of them," Byrd said. Walsh asked, "How do you want to play it?" "There's one guy 10 yards up behind a trash can. I want you to cover him as I get out into the road for a shot on the others," Byrd explained. "When do you want me to fire?" Walsh asked. "Ideally when I do. However, if you see him turn in my direction, don't hesitate to put him down," Byrd instructed. "You got it, Byrd," Walsh confirmed. The 2 men exchanged another fist bump before the young private readied his weapon. Byrd stepped out from cover, staying low but moving quickly across the sidewalk to the street. Every step of the way, he kept his weapon aimed at the militiaman, who still hadn't looked back in his direction. Just before Byrd made it to his ideal firing spot, the militiaman behind the trash can glanced over his shoulder, as if he was checking for more zombie activity. His eyes widened in horror as he spotted the soldier inching out in the middle of the road. The militiaman yelled out to warn his comrades as he adjusted his aim. Before he could come fully around, a bullet ripped into his gut, sending him to the ground screaming in pain. Private Byrd knew he had seconds to act, pushing himself further out into the street while squeezing the trigger and sending several rounds towards the entrance of the shop. One of his bullets found its target, striking a militiaman just above his chest protector, ripping his throat to shreds. The private reached his firing position, dropping to one knee while continuing to pull the trigger. He could see movement by the entrance of the store and kept firing until the figure by the doorway fell to the ground. He stayed on one knee for several seconds, refusing to move until he was certain the militiaman wasn't getting back up. His attention was only broken by Walsh whistling to him. "Are we clear?" Walsh called. "I think so," Byrd replied. "Well, let's move up and find out," Walsh said. Byrd nodded before yelling out to their comrades down the street. Privates Byrd and Walsh, standing up, moving up to make sure we're clear. "We'll cover you, soldier," a voice called back. The 2 of them moved as one, swiftly approaching the militiaman. Byrd kicked away the wounded militiaman's gun while aiming his own at him. "Show me those hands or else I'm putting a round in your head," Byrd ordered. The man yelped in pain as he extended his arms, showing that he didn't have a weapon. Byrd kicked at him, rolling him over to his back and patting him down quickly to make sure he didn't have a sidearm. "Okay, you can put pressure on that gut shot. But if your hands go anywhere else, I'm going to put another round in you, and it won't be a kill shot. Do you get me?" Byrd demanded. The militiaman nodded as he put his hands back on his wound, wincing in pain at the first touch. Byrd continued standing over the injured man, watching Walsh move up to the storefront. The private swept the floor with his rifle aimed downward, giving both bodies a firm kick in the side to make sure they were down for the count. After a few seconds of staring, he turned to the other soldiers down the street and called out. "We're clear over here," Walsh shouted. Byrd added, "And I need a medic if you have one." Walsh looked at his partner with concern as he hurried over to him. Once he saw Byrd wasn't hit, his concern turned to confusion. "What in the hell do you need a medic for?" Walsh asked. "It's for our new friend here," Byrd explained. "He's out here killing our people, and you want to save him?" Walsh exclaimed. Byrd took a knee beside the wounded man, playfully patting him on the leg while speaking loud enough for him to hear. "Well, given his current predicament, I'd be willing to bet he would be willing to spill his guts in exchange for our doc making sure that only stays a figure of speech. Isn't that right there, Sparky?" Byrd again tapped the militiaman in a playful manner, prompting some head nodding in return. "Good. Now where's my medic?" A moment later, a trio of soldiers walked over to Byrd, one of them carrying a med kit. However, before the medic could step to the patient, the leader of the squad stepped forward. "I'm Corporal Jones," the man introduced himself. "I really appreciate the assist there. These boys were putting up a hell of a fight." "I'm Private Byrd. This is Walsh." "And it was our pleasure," Byrd responded. Jones asked, "Now, what do you need a medic for, Private?" "This man has agreed to tell us about their plan in exchange for some medical care," Byrd explained. "Is that a fact now?" Jones replied. I found that if we just get one of those things and hover its mouth over his nuts for a few seconds, they tend to open right up too, and we save the medical supplies. While I'm sure that's effective, Corporal, I don't see any of those things around at the moment, and we're on a bit of a clock, Bird said. Consider my interest piqued, Jones replied. 2 privates running around without a squad, and you're on a clock. Do you mind sharing a little more info before I turn my doc loose? Some of their friends busted up our squad, blew up a house, and took 10 men down. I managed to take out one of theirs, but the other 2 fled to the south, and I'm really keen on learning where they're headed, Bird explained. Corporal Jones contemplated for a moment before giving a hand signal for his doctor to start working. We got into a skirmish with another group of theirs heading south, got cut off by a mob of those things and lost track of them. So it would seem like they're running a playbook. That's our thought, Bird said. Walsh asked, Corporal, do you have a working radio? Jones nodded and pulled his out, tossing it over to Walsh, who immediately turned it on. Before he could hit the talk button, the same loud static played over the speaker. Corporal Jones noticed Walsh just staring at the radio rather than using it. Is something the matter, Private? Jones asked. Walsh handed the radio back to Jones, shaking his head. Just listen to it. Jones held it up to his ear for a moment, letting out a string of curses once he recognized the sound. Damn it, they're jamming us. Is there any way to stop it? Walsh asked. Not without finding the source. My guess is it's with whoever the ringleader is. Speaking of, Corporal Jones trailed off as he took a knee beside the wounded militiaman. He lightly tapped his doctor to get his attention. What's the story, Doc? Jones asked. The doctor replied, It looks like the bullet did some damage, but it was a through and through, so it could have been worse. Prognosis? Jones questioned. I might be able to save him, the doctor confirmed. Jones flicked the militiaman square between the eyes to get his attention. The injured man flinched as he snapped into the moment. Okay, you heard the doc here. He can save you, but I'm not going to allow him to do so until you tell me what I want to know. If you do, I'll let the doc get to work. If you don't, I'll have the doc run into the restaurant over there and get a salt shaker for me. Now, how about you start acting like a middle school girl and get real chatty for me? Chapter 6. The trio of soldiers stood over the wounded militiaman alongside the doc, waiting for him to make his choice. They could see the debate raging in his mind by the contortions his face made. It didn't take long for self-preservation to take over, however. The militiaman groaned. Okay, fine, I'll talk. Corporal Jones crossed his arms. You better hurry, given how much blood you're losing. My team's mission was to come into town and raise some hell. Keep everybody occupied while the higher-ups did their thing, the militiaman admitted. And what's their mission? Jones pressed. I have no clue, man. It's a need-to-know type of situation, and I wasn't high enough on the totem pole to get a full briefing. Okay, well, I guess we're done here. Good luck to you, and hope more of those things don't show up before you bleed out. Jones hesitated for a moment before continuing, as if pausing for effect. You know what, just to be sure, I better put a couple rounds into your knees. We have enough runners going around and don't need another one. The corporal pulled out his handgun, aiming it at the militiaman's knees, causing him to scream out in a panicked tone. Wait, 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 he cried. Jones raised an eyebrow. You better give me something good, son, or else you're in for a rough time. Okay, look, I don't know what the main plan is outside of it something big in downtown, but I know what my orders were. We were to raise some hell for an hour, then move south across your southern defensive line. For what purpose? Jones asked, his voice calm but sharp. Some of the main militia force from Bend is going to pick us up and take us back to civilization. Where are you meeting your ride? I think there are multiple places, but I only know the one I was ordered to meet at. It's a supercenter 1.5 miles due south of the school on this side of the line. Private Bird interjected. That can't be more than 1 mile from here. Yeah, and then another 1.5 miles on top of that, Jones replied. And I assume the assholes you're after have a head start? Yeah, they do, Bird confirmed. Jones nodded. Okay then, do you have any other questions for this man? I have everything I need, Bird replied. Good. Jones aimed his handgun at the militiaman's head, pulling the trigger and sending a round through his skull. The sudden violent act startled the two privates, though they quickly shook it off. Bird spoke up. Corporal, we're going after them. Can you send word north about what we're dealing with? Jones shook his head. I wish I could, but my orders are straightforward. We're to secure this sector, and now that we know that their plan is to get to the south, we're going to lock it down in case more try to come through. We know where they're going, though, Bird argued. No, you know where a desperate man said he was going. The only believable thing he said was that the plan was to get past our lines and evacuate. That location doesn't pass the smell test, but you're more than welcome to try if you want. I'm not going to stop you, but I'm also not sparing any men either. Bird gritted his teeth. Fine. Walsh, I need you to go north and see if you can let someone higher up than a corporal know what's happening. Private Walsh frowned. I'm not letting you go by yourself. Yes, you are, but you're going to make damn sure I'm not alone down there for very long. Now get moving. Jones interjected, his tone firm. For what it's worth, Private, before the radios went to shit, I heard them talking about a strike force from Seattle coming this way. They were going to be staging at one of the hangars at the airport. You might not find what you're looking for there, but it should at least be a start. Thanks, Corporal, Walsh said, nodding. Jones returned the nod and walked back towards his men, immediately barking out orders to set up defensive lines and block off the road, getting his troops moving quickly. Bird turned to Walsh. Get to that hangar, Walsh. I will, man. You be safe, Walsh replied. The two exchanged a fist bump before parting ways, Bird running to the south while Walsh retraced his steps up towards the north. He hoped that since they had already been through there, the route would be mostly clear. At least the thought sounded good to him in his head. Private Walsh picked up the pace, covering a couple of blocks in a matter of minutes. He threw caution to the wind, not bothering to check the roads before running across them, hoping that even if someone or something noticed him, they would assume it was a zombie and continue doing whatever they were doing. For the first half-dozen blocks, this strategy worked like a charm. The only figures Walsh saw out of the corners of his eyes were corpses laying lifeless on the ground. As he approached the scene of the earlier ambush, he slowed down to not only catch his breath but to think through his plan. You gotta move over a couple of blocks, man. Even if there's nothing there anymore, you don't want to see your friends laying dead in the grass, Walsh muttered to himself. He took a few more deep breaths before adjusting course to the west. He kept to the yards of the houses to minimize his noise in case something lurked just beyond his view. As he got to the intersection a couple of blocks up, he made the turn to the north, hesitating before pushing onwards. In the road a block up stood a lone zombified soldier moving erratically, as if it was struggling to lock onto something to chase. Walsh instinctively reached for his rifle but immediately thought better of it. With a sigh, he drew his knife from its sheath, brandishing it in front of his face, as if he was trying to convince himself it was the right play. It's just one of them, man. A quick stab to the head, and you're on your way. Nothing to it, he muttered. Walsh let out a light grunt to motivate himself before taking off. He stayed on the grass as long as he could, wanting to get as close to the ghoul as he could before it knew he was there. Walsh picked up speed as he stepped onto the pavement 10 yards away from the creature, not wanting to risk slipping on the grass so close to the fight. It only took a couple of steps before the sound of his boots on the street reached the ghoul's ears, drawing an immediate reaction. The zombie let out an excited moan, immediately racing towards the private. Walsh didn't slow down, leading with his shoulder and planting it firmly into the creature's chest. The impact sent them both off balance, however. The soldier managed to drive the creature into the ground with enough force to crack its ribs. Walsh popped up immediately and began stabbing wildly at the creature's head. The first 2 blows glanced off the side of its face, slicing the flesh but not ending the threat. His third stab was on target, sending the blade through the zombie's eye, only stopping when the hilt hit its skull. The private yanked the blade free and readied it for another strike, however. He stopped when he realized the creature wasn't moving. With a sigh of relief escaping his lips, Walsh jumped to his feet, taking a moment to catch his breath. The respite was short-lived, however, as the sounds of excited moaning reached his ears. Walsh snapped his head to the right, letting out a panicked scream as he saw half a dozen zombies breaking away from feasting on a man on the ground to pursue him. Walsh stumbled over the corpse of the downed zombie, dropping his knife in the process. His instincts forced him to dart back for it, however. Once he saw the mob of ghouls gaining ground, his brain decided the knife wasn't important. The private kept to the street, running as hard as he could down it as the zombies kept up their pursuit. Despite his best efforts, fatigue began to set in, and the ghouls continued to gain ground. Walsh continued running, receiving an extra boost of adrenaline when he spotted 8 more creatures joining the chase. While they were 20 yards behind the pack, they definitely had his scent. Knowing that his time was running out, Walsh drew his handgun and panic-fired behind him as he ran. He didn't have the luxury of aiming, or even the ability to look over his shoulder to see if the bullets were landing. He hoped that something would hit and slow them down. The horde's footsteps continued to grow ever closer to him as the terror-fueled adrenaline began to wane. Dark thoughts danced around in Walsh's mind, sensing that the end was near. "Go out like a man. Get that rifle around and take down as many as you can," Walsh muttered. Walsh concentrated, trying to push those thoughts out, but they continued to linger as the zombies got within a few yards of him. Before he could enact his last stand, however, a loud whistle emanated from up ahead, drawing his attention. Standing in the middle of a yard on the next block was an older gentleman in a thick winter coat, waving a baseball bat in the air and motioning for him to come his way. With nothing left to lose, Walsh adjusted his course. When Walsh got within 30 yards of him, the old man turned and ran back towards the front door of his house, which stood wide open. He darted inside, taking up a position by it while yelling, "Move your ass, soldier." Walsh summoned every ounce of strength he had for the final push to the house. He stumbled forward as he crossed the threshold, collapsing and sliding across the hardwood floor in the entryway as the old man slammed the door shut, throwing the deadbolt just before the zombies arrived. The old man stepped away from the front of the house, gripping his bat tightly and saying a silent prayer that the door would hold. Much to his relief, the creatures trying to get inside couldn't make the door budge. "Are you okay, soldier?" the old man asked. Walsh lay on his back, taking deep breaths as his entire body screamed at him in pain. He opened his mouth, but the only sound to come from it was a gasp. Instead, he held out a thumbs up, letting him know that he was okay. "Take your time in getting up. I'll get you some water," the old man said, retreating into the house. Private Walsh groaned as he sat up, finally having his breath back. He sat there for several moments before the old man returned, handing him a bottle of water. "Drink all you want. I got plenty to spare." Walsh downed half a bottle in a matter of seconds before pulling himself back up to his feet. "Thank you. I would have been dinner for those things if you hadn't risked your life." The old man let out a chuckle. "It's not my first time staring down danger, although it would be nice if it would finally get around to being my last time." "Don't worry, I'll pull them away from here. I just need a minute to catch my breath," Walsh said. The old man shook his head and patted Walsh on the back. "That's a good one. I hate to break it to you, soldier, but you're stuck here for a while." "You don't understand. I have to get up to the airport," Walsh insisted. "You ain't making it 2 more blocks, let alone 2 more miles to the airport," the old man replied. "You don't understand, The old man raised his voice, cutting the private off. "No, you don't understand. Go upstairs and look out the bedroom window and tell me if you think you're going anywhere." The old man stared the private down before waving his hand dismissively in the direction of the stairs. It took a moment, but Walsh reluctantly did as requested, carrying his tired body up the stairs. He got his bearings, making his way to the bedroom at the front of the house. He went numb upon opening up the curtains, revealing the neighborhood below. Just from his limited vantage point, he could see 3 dozen creatures running around, most of whom were coming towards the house. He stared for several moments, watching as even more continued to emerge from the side streets, drawn to the noise. He staggered back a few steps before collapsing onto the bed, putting his head in his hands and muttering to himself, "I'm so sorry, Bird. I tried, man. I really did." Chapter 7. Garrett and Ryan took a knee on either side of a bay window, catching their breath before the final push towards the southern defensive line. While there was no movement directly outside the house, they could hear gunshots going off in all directions. Ryan said, "The line can't be too much further." Garrett replied, "Unless I'm mistaken, it's on the next block." "Given how much gunfire there is, I think it's safe to assume they've caught onto our plan," Ryan observed. Garrett countered, "Not necessarily. They have no communications, so they're flailing. I'm sure they still have people on the line in case we tried to overwhelm them there." "Even so, it sounds like we're going to have a hell of a time getting across," Ryan said. Garrett shrugged. "Only one way to find out. Let's get moving." Ryan nodded as they readied their weapons on the way to the door. Garrett put his hand on the knob, quickly yanking it open to allow his partner to dart through. The militiamen stepped into the front yard, sweeping the area for threats but seeing nothing ahead. The duo managed to get halfway to the street before bullets flew in their direction, narrowly missing them. "Contact right. Contact right," Garrett shouted. Both men squeezed off several rounds to their right as they ran, hoping that the panic fire would buy them enough time to get to cover. They sprinted across the yard, sliding to the ground behind a large tree as the bullets continued to fly in their direction. Wood and bark splintered off the tree as the duo tried to get a read on their attackers. Garrett poked his head out from behind cover, just far enough to spot muzzle flashes coming from a few doors down. "I got 4 shooters at least," Garrett said. 2 behind a pickup truck, 1 on the roof of the house, and another inside. "Damn it, they're not messing around," Ryan muttered. Garrett poked his rifle around the corner of the tree, squeezing off several rounds rapidly before ducking back behind cover. He waited several seconds before glancing at the result of his fire. The militia leader retreated back behind cover with a large smile on his face as the bullets continued peppering the tree. "I take it you got one?" Ryan asked. Garrett grinned. "Took down the rooftop asshole." Ryan paused before responding as the gunfire from the soldiers intensified for a moment. "Do you have another trick shot up your sleeve?" Garrett shook his head. "They're dug in pretty good. We're going to have to flank them." Ryan looked out towards the road, realizing he was closest to it. He let out a sigh once the situation set in. "And by we you mean me, don't you?" "I'll pin them down, I promise," Garrett assured him. "I swear, this is the last time I'm taking point this trip," Ryan grumbled. Garrett let out a chuckle as he turned to get into position. "Do you want me to count it down?" "Yeah, sure, why not?" "Because if I count I'm starting at 100, Ryan shot back. "Don't worry, you're going to be fine," Garrett said. Rather than respond, Ryan simply shook his head and turned towards the street, digging his feet into the ground to get a firm push off. "Okay, we're going in 3, 2. Garrett began, but he ceased his counting as the gunfire continued from the soldiers. However, the bullets stopped coming their way. The militia leader leaned out from behind cover to see the soldiers behind the truck being cut down by gunfire coming from the other side. "Reinforcements." "Come on," Garrett said. Both of them leapt up from behind the tree, moving towards the conflict with their rifles raised. Once he realized that the soldiers outside had been put down, Ryan raised his hands up, waving to their counterparts. "Don't shoot," Ryan called out. He moved a little closer to the street so that the militia on the other side could lay eyes on him. It only took a few steps for him to make eye contact with the team on the other side. "We're good," Garrett, Ryan confirmed. The militia leader ignored his partner, instead keeping his rifle at the ready and pointed towards the house. While the torrent of bullets had torn up the soldiers behind the truck, none had been fired towards the house. Garrett rushed forward, locked onto the front door of the house. The moment it moved at all, he squeezed the trigger as fast as he could, sending several rounds in that direction. The impacts alerted the other militia members to the danger, prompting them to open fire. Within seconds, dozens of rounds slammed into the front of the house, sending wooden debris flying through the air. Not a single shot came from the structure, however. The militiamen remained vigilant, with Garrett taking the point. "Cover me," Garrett shouted. The rest of the militia fell into line behind their leader, watching the front of the house for movement as he made his way to the door. Garrett fired off a couple more shots toward the ground when he spotted a leg still moving on the ground. Garrett remained vigilant, staring at the soldier to make sure he didn't move again. After several tense seconds, Garrett relaxed, turning around towards the other militia team. 4 men stood there, guns at the ready, as they recognized their leader. "You boys have a way with timing," Garrett remarked. "We were headed to the line when we heard your little skirmish here. Thought you could use a hand," a militiaman explained. "That's an understatement." "They came out of nowhere," Ryan added. "Yeah, we ran into another group of them a few blocks to the north. I'm pretty sure they're not the cream of the crop, though. It's like they can't hit a moving target to save their lives," the militiaman said. Garrett nodded. "You saw the wasteland to the south of here. Would you use your best talent keeping watch over that?" "No, I don't suppose I would," the militiaman admitted. "Still, we need to be careful approaching their line," Garrett warned. "We already have a crossing scoped out. It's a block to the south and another block to the west," the militiaman informed them. "How does it look?" Ryan asked. "They're dug in pretty good, but nothing 2 teams can't handle," the militiaman replied. "What do you need us to do?" Garrett asked. The militiaman looked to Garrett confidently, as if he was proud that their leader was allowing them to take point. "The main force is set up in between 2 houses, with a guard inside the house directly in front of them. There's a line of cars stretching across the property line, and they're on the other side of it," the militiaman explained. He looked up to the duo, making sure they were following along before continuing. "If you 2 can silently get into the house and take down that guard, then set up a firing position at the back, my team will come in from the sides. My hope is that they'll expose themselves to the middle, thinking they're protected. And that's when you strike," the militiaman finished. "That's a solid plan," Garrett agreed. "It is, but why are we crossing where it's defended? Why don't we move down a block and hop the fence? Ignore them completely," Ryan suggested. "We thought about that, but there's an ungodly amount of barbed wire stretching on for a couple of blocks in either direction," the militiaman explained. "I can't imagine it's like that for the entire stretch of the line, though," Ryan argued. "You're right, it's probably not. But we also don't know what kind of manned defenses they have. This post is manageable, and I'd much rather deal with a situation where I know what I'm walking into rather than an unknown situation. But that's just me," the militiaman said. Ryan glanced over to Garrett, who gave him a light-hearted shrug in return. "Yeah, you're right. I'm ready when you guys are," Ryan said. "You heard the man. Let's get this done," the militiaman said. Garrett nodded to the militiaman as he and his team moved towards their objective. The militia leader playfully smacked Ryan on the chest, waving him to follow. "Come on, we're almost out of this," Garrett said. The 2 militiamen followed the others towards the line, taking up a position across the street from the target house. They stared at the front of it, looking for movement inside but seeing nothing. "That looks a little too easy," Ryan remarked. "Somebody's got to be in there, and I bet they're watching the street like a hawk," Garrett said. "So how do we get in without being detected?" "We have to assume he's locked that place up tight," Ryan said. Garrett thought about it for a moment before a sly smile crawled across his face. "You still know how to throw your knife, don't you?" "There's not much else to do on guard duty," Ryan said. "Very true. I want you to move a couple houses down and cross the street. Get up beside the house and wait for me to draw him out," Garrett instructed. Ryan looked at his leader in confusion before shrugging his shoulders and going along with the plan. "If you get him outside, I'll put him down." Ryan nodded and sprinted off, quickly crossing the street and moving up into position while Garrett watched. Once his partner was ready, the militia leader stepped out into the open, slinging his rifle over his shoulder as he walked towards the street. He kept his hands raised, showing that he wasn't a threat, while casually whistling a tune. Garrett barely reached the middle of the road before the front door of the house opened up. A young soldier threw open the front door, staying inside while raising his rifle towards the militiamen. "Stop right there," the soldier barked. Garrett did as instructed, stopping in the middle of the road while continuing to whistle his tune. The soldier stared at him for several seconds, scanning the yards and houses behind the militia leader for threats. Once he was convinced there wasn't any backup, he took a step out into the open. The soldier barely had time to open his mouth before a knife pierced the side of his throat. The young man dropped his weapon as he collapsed to the ground, grasping at the wound as the blood poured out. Garrett and Ryan casually walked up to the front door, looking down at the young man before entering. "In the next life, don't forget to check to the side," Garrett said. The life in the young soldier's eyes began to fade as Ryan reached down for his blade. With a forceful yank, he freed his weapon and took what little life was left from the man. "Come on, let's get into position. We still have work to do." Chapter 8. Garrett and Ryan moved swiftly through the house with their weapons at the ready, clearing it before taking up their positions at the back of the house. The militia leader set up a firing position by the kitchen window, while his partner stayed out of sight beside the patio door. 10 yards away from them sat the defensive line, which was little more than 4 cars parked bumper to bumper in barbed wire fencing stretching to either side. Behind the cars patrolled 5 soldiers, all of whom appeared to be on edge. The combination of gunfire in the area and lack of communications no doubt frayed their nerves. Most of them kept watch towards the no man's land to the south, while the other 2 focused on the neighborhood. "When this sets off, focus your fire in the middle of the line and move out from there. That barbed wire looks thick, so they aren't going to have anywhere to go," Garrett said. "Copy that, Garrett," Ryan replied. Both men stared through the sights on their rifles, waiting for the moment to strike. Barely a minute passed before gunfire popped off from the sides of the line. Immediately, one soldier took a round to the chest and dropped, sending panic through their ranks. "Hit them hard," Garrett shouted. Both militiamen opened fire, shattering the glass and sending a volley of rounds towards the enemy lines. The soldier in the middle of the defensive position took the brunt of the assault, catching multiple bullets. The life fully left his body before he hit the ground. The remaining soldiers behind the line panic-fired, sending rounds in every direction without much aiming. Neither Garrett nor Ryan felt the need to retreat to cover, instead remaining in position and lining up their next shot. It didn't take long for one of the soldiers to spot a target off to the west, stepping up and squeezing off a few shots. In doing so, however, he exposed himself to Ryan, who sent a single round through the side of his head. A similar scene played out on the other side of the line, with Garrett striking down another soldier who was unaware he had him in his sights. With only one soldier remaining on the line, the gunfire outside came to a halt. "Did we get them all?" Ryan asked. "I don't think so. Keep watch. I'm moving to you," Garrett replied. "Copy that," Ryan said. Garrett broke from his position and moved to the shattered patio door, stepping around Ryan to get outside. He looked to either side, seeing the rest of the militia team moving up along with him. The closer the men got to the line, the louder a whimpering sound became. They exchanged curious glances, not sure of what to make of it. Garrett motioned to one of the other militiamen to go over the top of the car to investigate. The man broke from the ranks, running up and leaping onto the hood. He aimed his weapon to the ground as if he was going to fire, but slowly lowered his weapon. "Garrett, I think you need to see this," the militiaman called. Garrett joined the man on the top of the car, looking down into the enemy line and seeing one wounded soldier on the ground whimpering. He couldn't have been more than 20 and clearly scared out of his mind. His weapon lay beside him. The soldier's only focus was trying to stop the bleeding on his arm. "What do you want to do, Garrett?" the militiaman asked. The militia leader thought about it for a moment before letting out a whistle and yelling out to his men. "Everybody over the line, let's get moving," Garrett ordered. Garrett stepped over to the terrified soldier, who flinched as the militia leader got closer to him. "Relax, kid. Take some deep breaths," Garrett said. Garrett kicked the rifle away from the soldier, causing him to flinch again. "I said take some deep breaths. I promise it'll do you some good," Garrett repeated. The young man did as instructed, inhaling and exhaling deeply several times, calming his nerves. Garrett stood over him while the rest of his troops made their way through the line and into no man's land. Once they were over, Garrett took a knee beside the soldier. If you want to live through the day, you're going to do exactly what I say. Do you understand? Garrett asked. The young soldier continued sobbing but nodded in acknowledgement. Good. You're going to count to 100, and when you're through, you're going to go find a house a couple blocks away and stay there until tomorrow. Can you do that? Garrett asked. The young soldier nodded again, continuing to take deep breaths. Garrett gave the kid a pat on the leg before getting up and joining the others on the south side of the line. Come on, we have a ways to go, Garrett said. The militia picked up the pace, getting a block away from the line before relaxing a bit. Garrett, can I ask you a question? A militiaman asked. We got plenty of time. Have at it, Garrett replied. Why did you let that kid live? The militiaman asked. Because there was no sport in it. He wasn't a fighter, Garrett answered. Based on who we've been fighting today, I don't think many of them were fighters, Ryan added. Yeah, but they were at least trying. He was blubbering like a first grader who dropped his ice cream cone, Garrett said. Ryan looked around to the other militiamen, receiving the same dismissive shrug from each of them. Reluctantly, he nodded in agreement with them as they continued pushing south. The first several blocks were completely devoid of life or unlife, as if it was a buffer between civilization and the apocalypse. It didn't take long for them to stumble across the mass grave, however, each man stifling a dry heave from the smell. Jesus Christ, that's a lot of death, Ryan said. Watch your step through it and keep moving. Our ride isn't going to wait forever, Garrett instructed. The militia carefully navigated the corpses, reaching the other side and continuing at a brisk pace. The further south they moved, however, the more movement they began to see. At first, it was just the occasional creature shambling about, but it grew steadily. The group walked to the top of a hill, looking down into a small business district below. From their vantage point, they could see several blocks, with dozens of creatures moving through the empty parking lots and streets. It took Garrett a moment of surveying the scene before he spotted their rendezvous point, a supercenter ahead on the right. There it is. Our ride should be there in 15, so let's not keep them waiting, Garrett said. The men kept their rifles slung over their shoulders, however. They kept blades at the ready for close encounters. While the numbers certainly weren't in their favor, the ghouls moved at a snail's pace, making them easy prey for their strikes. The militiamen struck down a dozen zombies on their way to the supercenter, barely breaking a sweat in the process. The front doors to the store were open just a couple of inches, preventing creatures from entering but making it easy for the militia to breach. With a snap and point of his fingers, Garrett sent several men forward to strike down shamblers with knife strikes to their heads. The militia leader waltzed up to the front doors, pulling them apart and granting them entry. Dried pools of blood stained the empty sales floors that had long been stripped of anything that might be useful to the militia. The supercenter was on the wrong side of the defensive line, but close enough to make runs to during the zombie purge of Seattle. Ryan, see if you can't find us something to drink. Maybe the military didn't take all of it, Garrett said. Sure thing, Garrett, Ryan replied. While Ryan walked off, the rest of them leaned up against the front registers, giving their legs a much-needed break. I swear, I need to go on more patrols. My legs are angry as hell, a militiaman said. If Church pulls off what he's trying to pull off, you may not have to worry about patrols for quite some time, Garrett said. Really? What's he trying to do? Another militiaman asked. Yeah, I'm a little curious about that myself, Private Bird said. Garrett and the rest of the militiamen flinched at this unexpected voice joining their conversation. The men began reaching for their guns but stopped when they noticed Private Bird standing in the doorway with his rifle pointed at them. I know there's only one of me, but at this range, you can rest assured I'm good enough to put most of you down before you can get off a single shot. So if you wouldn't mind keeping your hands high, I'd appreciate it, Bird said. The militiamen glanced over to Garrett, who nodded slightly, getting them to comply with the soldier. I have to say, soldier, it must suck to draw the short straw and be sent in here alone, Garrett said. Don't worry, my friends are closer than you think, Bird replied. Somehow, I doubt that, Garrett said. Well, you're just going to have to take my word for it. But while we wait on them to roll in, why don't you go ahead and finish your thought? What's this church person going to do exactly? Bird asked. Oh, a little bit of this, a little bit of that. Just enough to make your bosses think twice about standing up against us, Garrett said. Do you really think we're just going to kneel down to you, militia? Bird asked. Before Garrett had a chance to respond, a single shot rang out from behind the registers. The bullet tore through Bird's knee, sending him collapsing to the ground. The pain radiated through his body, forcing his weapon from his hands. Garrett reacted swiftly, darting over to the injured soldier and kicking the gun away before raising his own handgun and aiming it at his head. Well, we got one of you kneeling before us. I don't think it's going to be all that hard to get the rest of you to do the same, Garrett said. Garrett motioned to the others to keep a watch on him as he moved to the door, making sure to stay behind cover as he looked out. It didn't take him long to realize that the young soldier had come alone, causing a smirk to emerge. You got a set of balls on you, kid? Coming after us alone? Garrett asked. Somebody had to, Bird said. Garrett chuckled a bit as a horn honked from the side of the store. A few seconds later, a caravan of SUVs pulled up, stopping just in front. Let's get loaded up, men, Garrett ordered. What about him? Ryan asked. Garrett thought for a moment before reaching down and grabbing the assault rifle from the ground and securing the private's sidearm. Do you have a knife, kid? Garrett asked. Why do you want to go around with me? Bird replied. No, I just want to make sure that you aren't left without something to defend yourself with, Garrett said. Bird grimaced as he reached down to his boot, feeling around for his blade. With a defeated sigh, he shook his head when he felt it missing. I seem to have misplaced it, Bird admitted. Garrett reached to his belt loop, unlatching a large knife and sheath, tossing it to the ground in front of the soldier. Normally I'd just put a bullet in the back of your head and be done with you. But to be honest, you're the first soldier I've met today with any moxie. What's your name, kid? Garrett asked. Private Bird, like this, the young soldier said, extending his middle finger towards Garrett. The gesture only impressed Garrett more. He let out a laugh as he pulled out his handgun, brandishing it in front of Bird for a moment. Well, Private Middle Finger, allow me to give you one in return, Garrett said. Garrett aimed his handgun in the air, firing off several shots before holstering it. I figure with as slow as those things are moving, you might have 10 minutes to get someplace safe before they arrive. If you live, which I kind of hope you do, maybe I'll see you on the battlefield again one day, Garrett said. Garrett turned around, forcefully shoving open the sliding front doors, fully opening up the entrance to the store. He gave a slight, playful wave to the young soldier as the convoy drove off to their next destination. In the distance, Bird could see a dozen or so creatures shambling in his direction, with more movement on the horizon. He reached down to his side, grabbing the knife and putting it between his teeth as he began crawling on the floor deeper into the store. He paused on the other side of the registers, looking around for some place to hide. The only door he could see was near the front of the store, which appeared to be the manager's office. The private let out a pained grunt as he forced himself up to his good leg, hopping along for several steps before grabbing onto a nearby shopping cart. He used it as a makeshift walker, helping him move swiftly across the floor to the office door. Much to his surprise, the door was unlocked, allowing him easy entry. Leaving the shopping cart behind him, he tipped it over for a little more protection before securing the lock on the door and collapsing onto the desk inside the small office. He laid there for several minutes before being able to pull himself up and tie his shirt around his leg to slow the bleeding. Once secure, he laid back on the desk, fighting the urge to pass out from the pain. The moans from the zombies entering the store reached his ears, sending a shiver through him. He let out a sigh as he kept repeating one thought over and over again. Walsh, please tell me someone knows I'm here. The end.